everyone. My name is Eric Petrusic. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Blue Gator Consulting, a Salesforce implementation partner. Today, I'd like to share with you a presentation that I originally made at Florida Dreaming, a Trailblazer community conference entitled First Look at Data Cloud. So just as introduction, as I mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Blue Gator. We're a Salesforce practice that primarily focuses on nonprofits and entertainment venues. Some of the examples that I share through this presentation will be filtered through the lens of that industry, but of course the principles are applicable on a broader basis. We're also a Data Cloud certified implementation partner. Of course, Data Cloud is a relatively new offering from Salesforce, and particularly a very rapidly evolving one. And so the knowledge that I share with you as of the recording here in November 2023 is accurate to the best of our knowledge. But of course, as you watch this in the future, then please do consult the current state of the platform for any purchasing or implementation decisions. So with that said, let me jump into a discussion of the platform itself. You may have seen diagrams which look like this in the past, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking through this because I think it's a very good guide to how the platform fits together. And particularly, that's an important perspective because all those different parts of the platform work together to produce the results that are impactful for your business. It starts on the left-hand side with ingestion of data. There are several different avenues through which data can be brought into the platform, and we will talk about that in the course of this presentation. Primarily, they tend to be either on a batch or a streaming basis. The batch options tend to work on perhaps a daily or hourly basis. The streaming options tend to be not quite real time, depending on the avenue through which they come in. It can be 15 minutes for API transactions, as low as 2 minutes for ingest events that come from the web or mobile SDK. But in any case, it all comes in what are called data streams, which again, we'll talk about here. And as they're brought into the Data Cloud data model, there's a process through which they are standardized. They're brought into a standard information model, and then go through a process of harmonization and standardization to, for instance, reconcile phone number formats. We've all seen phone numbers that in different external systems may have parentheses, may have dashes, may have country codes, may have nothing. Ultimately, if we want to make comparison against those, we want to have a standard format. After we've gone through that harmonization process, then we can unify that to produce a picture of across different data sources, different identities within them, based on certain rules that we'll define. How do we believe that this is the same person here, and produces what's called a unified individual? Once you've done that, the right hand of this diagram puts you in position to use that data. So initially with what they call calculated insights, which we'll talk about the different forms of those. There's insight available for analytics to be plugged in through Tableau or Tableau CRM offerings. Data actions that can be triggered for specific alerts or notifications. Segmentation, which can be used to drive activations into, for instance, Marketing Cloud or other external systems. And essentially different export mechanisms through which you can then take the unified identity information from the various systems which go into the composite of that, and then take action on them here as well. So a few key characteristics I'd like to talk about with the platform first. So Data Cloud did not just spring out of nowhere over the last 12 months here. It's really an evolution of several different existing disparate products within the Salesforce ecosystem. Primarily, it's based off of Marketing Cloud's customer data platform, which has been around for a few years. What it seems Salesforce has done is recognize the applicability of that functionality to a broader basis within its platform. And then they've also leveraged several different elements of other offerings from within the ecosystem to support that. So as we look at it in our demo, we will see it in the Lightning interface. It'll look just like any other type of object that you look at there. There are certain capabilities and opportunities for leveraging the Einstein AI capabilities within the platform. Some of the data segmentation is and insights are built off of the same kind of data prep builder that you get in Tableau CRM and so on. So if you step back, you really can see how Salesforce is using this as the basis for across their offerings for bringing data together and being able to really take action on it. That said, also data cloud storage is not part of core CRM, as much as it will look like it's part of the regular Salesforce interface. It's actually backed by Amazon Web Services, and accordingly, it does not count against platform storage limits. This is an important distinction if you're accustomed to dealing with data from multiple data sources, large data sets. You quickly recognize that the Salesforce core CRM, especially if you don't have a large number of users, can be very limiting in terms of the amount of data that you can bring in, which has, honestly always been a bit of an awkward point where it's marketed as sort of a customer 360 where you bring in all together all your data from all your different sources and be able to take action on that. And to some extent that's been true, but then we've often had to be mindful of, well, how much data are we bringing in? How long back or how far back can we take that data? And Data Cloud doesn't have any such limitations. It's built specifically as a aggregated data lake and limited really just by ultimately the amount of storage that you're going to use in the platform, which is paid separately. So so essentially you can look at it as a repository for a place to bring in large amounts of data and not have it subject to those same limitations. Because of that, perhaps it is limited in terms of where and how it can be used from some pieces of core that you're accustomed to. There is some access from some parts of Lightning reports. There are some automation hooks that come in, but it's not as seamlessly integrated as something would be as part of the native platform. So as we've really looked at Data Cloud, we see that there's probably two key use cases where you would really consider the usage of this. So one is for, and I've alluded to this in my introduction here, is unification of multiple different data systems. If you have, say for an example, that you're a cruise line and you have systems of record for your website, for your web bookings, for call center bookings, perhaps could be through a different system. It can there's onboard operational systems. There's loyalty programs. These are all valid systems of record, and particularly at enterprise scale, operators may be using best of breed solutions for each of these. And so that presents a difficult conundrum for identifying, well, how many Eric Petrusics are there? With a name like mine, honestly, it's usually not too hard. As far as I know, I'm the only Eric Petrusic in the world. But with John Smith, it can be much more difficult. And particularly as you think about how in certain environments, parties may change. There may be different components of a family that are going on a cruise. It may be that I have my personal email that I use for the loyalty program, but for whatever reason, this particular cruise was booked through my work email. Those are both valid data points that are associated with me. But identifying that they both belong to me is a tricky problem, and Data Cloud is well suited for ingesting, categorizing that data, and then presenting a means by which you can identify, where that's shared. Another one, and maybe this is a buzzword from 10 or 15 years ago, is for big data. One example is the Ford Motor Company, where you've seen spoken in Salesforce presentations frequently about automotive manufacturers that use Data Cloud here, and Ford is at least one of them here. And in their case, I'm sure they have multiple systems for one, but particularly, I would look at it through the lens of this is large amounts of telemetry data and transactional data. So, for example, I have Ford's electric vehicle, the Mustang Mach-E, and whenever I take that for a drive, there's some amount of the usage information which is transmitted up to my account on Data Cloud. As it happens, I've just passed the 10,000 mile mark where my first regularly scheduled maintenance is required, and sure enough, I'm getting notifications that are coming out to me in my app, in my email, saying you're due for your next service. Would you like to schedule it? Which unto itself probably doesn't sound all that remarkable. I mean, we can do that within Salesforce core through flow very easily if you set a record triggered flow on some condition and fire that out. But think about that at the scale of what Ford is handling here. There are millions, tens of millions of Ford customers in the world, Ford cars on the road. And ultimately, as they're all transmitting data into this host for every journey that they go on, I mean, this is billions and billions of records that we're dealing with here, and that's well beyond what you can comfortably handle within Salesforce core. Data Cloud is suited and built, purpose-built for that specific scale of transactional record handling. So let's talk about where that data comes from. So there's a few different sources that that you can use for bringing into Data Cloud in a flexible fashion here. So from Salesforce ecosystem sources here, there are good tools for hooking up to core CRM. In fact, you can hook up a Data Cloud instance to multiple Salesforce instances, and they provide what they call data bundles. They have one for sales, one for service, one for loyalty, which can kind of help basically kind of jumpstart data ingest. They'll include sort of the default accounts and contact type records that you would ingest, as well as some data mappings that are associated with that. There are also similar native connectors for Marketing Cloud, for Commerce Cloud, and particularly through MuleSoft. And this is a particularly important vector because if you're familiar with that platform, they have native connectors for dozens of different systems, and it's easily extensible. And so this is really an avenue through which, if you've got some particular enterprise system here, that it's a great means of essentially building a robust connector which can bring in that data reliably using the MuleSoft platform. There are a number of different file-based solutions which correspond to the major cloud providers as well. If you're not familiar with these icons, this Amazon, Azure Cloud, Google Cloud, their data storage solutions, native connectors are available for all of these, as well as good old SFTP. If you're working with kind of a lower tech solution, which is just dropping CSV files out into a directory on a periodic basis, no problem. There's a native connector for that as well. As they're brought in, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this presentation talking about this, but there's sort of a hierarchy of the ingest objects that it'll go through. So data source objects correspond most closely to the original source data. These correspond to the data streams that we'll take a look at. Those are ingested and stored initially within data lake objects. There's some light transformation that can go in here. I believe there's also means of posting data directly into these as well, too, if you're sort of building your own connection here. But ultimately, where the data is going to go to as it's harmonized and standardized are the data model objects, the DMOs. And we will spend some time talking about this because this is the basis for the data cloud data model here. And on that note, the data model actually is significantly different from what you're accustomed to in Salesforce core. There is some overlap where it's based off of for instance, order information. There's an order object order object in Salesforce core, order object in Data Cloud as well. But the Data Cloud data model is based off of what's called the Cloud Information Model. This is a sort of industry consortium of designed to provide sort of a non-proprietary model for data interchange. The scope of that is really kind of beyond here. If you go to for instance, the Salesforce Architect site, you can find a lot of data model diagrams which talk about the different layouts of how different pieces of data are there. Just for the purpose of this presentation, though, I am going to use one example and talk about how this is a much more normalized model. So if you're not more familiar with that term, it's sort of a database schema design term, which means hierarchical, really. So if you think about a contact in core CRM, for example, there's a lot of detail information which is placed directly on that record. That's called a denormalized model. So there's an email address field on a contact record. There's an address, several address fields, phone fields, all within that specific record. Within a data cloud type normalized model, that is broken up among several different records which have relationships to each other. So a contact is most closely associated with an individual within the data cloud model, and then email addresses are stored in a separate record called contact point emails or contact point address, contact point phone, which are then associated with that individual. And you'll see a little bit more of why that as we get into the unified versions of these as well. So once we've gone through that ingest process from these different data sources, we've brought them in, we've harmonized them into the DMOs, then we're ready for that step about the unification here. And there's an important point to think about in the context of Data Cloud here, which is, and they call this the golden record versus unified identity. So the golden record, the notion of that is really about trying to get to a single record which corresponds to an individual. This is how you would think about, for instance, a deduplication process within core CRM today. Whether you're using the standard platform tools or some of the add-ons which are available, like a duplicate check or Cloud Dingo or something like that. Generally, what you're doing is you're looking at two different records and saying, okay, well, these are both named Eric Petrusic. They have the same email. They have the same address. I'm going to collapse those together because they're the same person here. And that's fine within a single system of record. You want to do that for data hygiene as much as possible. But when you look at a broader basis of like an enterprise system, say that cruise line example from before, it's not that it's a little bit too simplistic of a model to say like, well, what's the one email address which corresponds to this? In my example from earlier, my email in the loyalty system is my personal email, whereas on this particular booking, it's a different one, and those are both valid. And so Data Cloud is built around this notion of unified identity instead. So it's not trying to deduplicate anything at all. What it does is it generates this unified identity, which are based on matching and resolution rules. We'll take a look at those. Those are similar to how you would be familiar with matching and duplicate rules from within core. But key, it does retain that source data lineage. It is not updating the source systems. It's not even going to update the data within Data Cloud to try to eliminate anything. It's going to try to retain all of that and then basically store that information in new versions of those individual and contact point records, which are based around those unified identities. As you'll see when we get to the demos, there are rules defined around, well, what do you think is probably the best one? Is it the most recently used one? Is it the most commonly used one? But some of those decisions are not made until activation time. Further down the road when it comes to usage, again, returning to my cruise line example here, if I'm going to make a message out to someone about some topic in the loyalty program, then I'm going to want to use the email which corresponds to that. If it's for a booking, I want to use the email that corresponds to that. And so Data Cloud is about not just trying to deduplicate and collapse these records, but also to maintain what are all the valid contact points we have and where did they come from. So again, once we've gone through that unification process, we've come out of this with some perspective on who we think are unified individuals. Now we're ready to start doing things with those. And so there are two different types of calculated insights in the system. The first one, and this is a bit confusing, is just called calculated insights. These are essentially batched ones. So these are for when you want to be processing something across, for instance, all history, the large data sets. My Ford example of who's due for service because they're passing the 10,000 mile limit. That's a good example where you're running these on very large sort of overnight type jobs. These are what are used as the basis for segments and activations, which we'll talk about those and particularly how they relate to Marketing Cloud or Commerce Cloud or other usage like that. There is another type of insights called streaming insights. These are more sort of in the moment type things, temporally based, where they are basically built around particular windows of time and things that happen within those. Those windows of time can be up to 24 hours, can be as short as a minute. And what these trigger are what are called data actions. So these, essentially are different means of taking actions. These are where it's notifications or can trigger activity within the Salesforce platform as well. But they're designed very specifically around shorter windows of time. A word on analytics as well. So I mentioned in passing earlier, the capability to review the Data Cloud information through Tableau or Tableau CRM. And That is true. I mean, the hooks are provided where you can access those through those systems here. That said, it's not you won't see it as part of the platform itself. It's not like it's tightly integrated at this time where there's a here go see the Tableau visualizations that correspond to this. Those tools are really built around being able to access data and then be able to they're very well built for building up the insights and researching within those. And there's definitely the capability for that, but not directly within the Data Cloud platform as we take a look at it. So, so let me talk about segmentation and activation here as well. So these kind of go bundled together here. Segmentation is really about generating a group of individuals, and particularly with some sort of engagement data that goes along with them. So, example segments might be customers with lifetime value over $50,000. You're going to need to know who those customers are. That may be drawing data together from several different commerce systems to make that assessment here. But it's essentially something that then you would take some action on that group of customers. Website visitors within, for instance, 3 times within the past week. That indicates some sort of intent for engagement with your brand here. Those are, again, something that you might want to take some action on here. Activation targets, what you can do with these once you have them. For one, you can just generate a file. Here are all my customers that met this criteria, and the fields that are of interest that are going to correspond to those. Send that off to any of those file connectors as we discussed in the data ingest layer. There are hooks to tie that in directly to ad platforms, for instance, through a Google AdWords, or a Meta or Amazon. Within the Salesforce ecosystem, again, Marketing Cloud, Commerce Cloud, those are good avenues for being able to trigger that. For instance, in the website example, if someone has been looking at a particular product on my website within the past week, great opportunity to engage them and say, hey, here's we noticed that you're interested in this. If they haven't converted, here's a little discount to do so, or something like that. And then finally, you can just activate directly to another DMO within Data Cloud. Maybe it's not something that you want to take action on right now, but you want to store that for subsequent action. Perfectly legitimate. So with that said, I'd like to step out of the presentation at this point, and I'm going to go over to show you what does Data Cloud actually look like in practice. So give me a moment to bring this up. Okay, so hopefully you all can see this here, but as I mentioned, when you first land in Data Cloud, it looks a lot like Salesforce. It's accessed through an app. It comes with a bunch of tabs, which we'll kind of walk through as we go through these here. And it's a very familiar interface, and it works very much like that. So the setup itself is actually accessed through a setup menu. There's a Data Cloud setup here. I have these kind of pre-tabbed out for guidance, and in some cases because they take a little bit to load. But this is similar to what you might have seen for Service Cloud setup, where there's sort of a separate menu which has specific different options which correspond to that offering. Generally they go they're concerned with configuration of certain external systems that you might work with here to a great extent. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but just something to be aware of. But I do want to start with the discussion of the data stream. So we were talking about the ingest here. This example is based off of a trial org. And this was basically configured for connection to Salesforce CRM, to an Amazon S3 bucket, which corresponds to essentially like an e-commerce store. And then there's a few that come through website SDK here as well. And I'm not going to talk through all these in great detail here, but you can see, for example, the ones that come from the CRM are tagged specifically with a name which corresponds to the org. And so, as I mentioned earlier, you could have multiple Salesforce orgs that you have access to. It will retain, for instance, contact will probably be drawn in from all of them. You'll know which ones they came from and be able to take action on that accordingly. If we go into a new data stream here, and we're going to define where that comes from, you can see that this particular org was limited for the exercises that supported the trial here. But this is where you would select different. If I had a Marketing Cloud connection in place, I want to select this as a Marketing Cloud source, or Azure data source here. And then you can see the MuleSoft connectors that are available here. Of course, there's a wide range of out-of-the-box connectors that are available. You're quite capable of defining your own here, but this does provide an access through which you can ingest data declaratively through a variety of sources associated with that. So the one thing I do want to show you too is, so if I select CRM as an example, and this might take a moment here. This particular org did not have an account associated with it. Say that we were going to go map a new data stream from account. It's going to prompt me to select a category associated with that. And these are actually significant in terms of how they're used within Data Cloud. So profile category tends to correspond to identity information, and essentially the DMOs which correspond to this are eligible for use in identity resolution. Engagement tends to correspond to information about usage. So transactional information. For instance, my Ford example. Some use of the car that was associated with that. And then other tends to be other types of identifiers, just sort of a miscellaneous category. You won't take as much advantage of these, whereas profile can be used in identity engagement or identity resolution and engagement, in particularly in segmentation and streaming insights there. So I'm not going to go through the process of creating a new one here, but I will take you over to take a look at the data model objects that are associated with those. And so you see that this is where this comes from, that cloud information model. These are generally all standard, or well, most of these are standard objects within that model. But of course, you can extend them as well. There are custom objects which you can define completely from scratch. Just as in Salesforce, on the standard ones, you can define additional fields here. And I'm going to go take a look, for instance, at the contact one and show you the mappings, which is the sort of nice spider web thing that you'll see in a lot of the presentations, and looks really neat here. But contact's a great example because, as I talked about earlier, that corresponds to a number of different identifier or DMOs within the data model schema here. And a lot of the mappings for these happen directly out of the box. With those data bundles, when you install them for sales or service, it will identify based on the common fields which are on contact, which DMOs do this correspond to, and how do they line up with those here. It is an interactive map. It's not just a nice diagram here. If I look, for instance, at their business phone is not currently mapped here, and say that with my particular domain that is in use, I select that as an option. That's going to correspond to something on contact point phone. Let's say that I'm going to correspond that to for business use here. Just as simple as that. Now, they created a mapping from the business phone over here, and then that would be used as part of my DMO. So the mappings can also be defined in batch on a broader basis here, but the tools that are supported for this are pretty robust. So again, once we've defined the data model objects that are associated with those, then we're ready for identity resolution. You can define multiple different identity resolution sets. It is a limited number. I think by default you can define 2 in the base Data Cloud implementation, primarily really for sort of A/B comparisons if you're trying out a new set here. But I just have one, so we'll kind of walk through that here. So it starts with a section about matching rules, where you define how is it that I'm going to determine that multiple individuals actually are should be considered as a unified set. So the default rule that comes out is I think this is default. We might have done some configuration based off of fuzzy name, normalized email, exact birth date. And you can go in and change some of the options which are associated with these. And then as you can see in my example, we've added some special ones for the particular use case here, where there are loyalty programs where we know if 2 different individuals are sharing the same loyalty number, we're going to consider them part of the same individual. So matching rules, very much like you would think about them within Salesforce. And then the reconciliation rules are similar as well too. So if we think about what's the determination for which of the contact point phones are we most going to consider as sort of the default for the unified individual. You can see there's a reconciliation rule there around most frequent, and again, you can set it to most recent, and so on a field by field basis and make that determination. Although again, we're not going to eliminate or remove any data here. We will have access to any of the associated contact points with a unified individual, even if it didn't come from that same data source originally, when it comes to the activation point. Based on that, you'll get statistics over here about how successful have we been with that unification. There's a consolidation rate that will give you information about here, and depending on how loose or stringent those rules are, those numbers will go up and down, and you can identify basically how do you want to set those rules and work with your clients on being able to do that. So once we have those unified individuals, again, then calculated insights are kind of the next step. They're actually not a required step. You can just jump right to segmentation if that's the case, but they tend to be very useful, because if you're in this world where you're trying to draw these pieces of data together, then generally you're trying to extract some sort of information from that here. And so there are two different ways that actually I think there's more than that, but the two primary ways through which you can generate calculated insights are, for one, they have what they call the visual builder. Actually, this brings up, I had this in a different tab, but this is very similar to, I mentioned the Tableau CRM data prep builder earlier, where you can identify what are the different DMOs that I'm going to pull from, how am I correlating those together, and then what kind of information am I pulling out of that. In this case, this was a spend by customer aggregating across all the different data sources. This was an example of one of those batched calculated insights. Another one, this is a streaming insight here, this geofence stream. This particular one was just defined via straight SQL or SQL. Perfectly valid here, although there are specific hooks which are particular to the calculated insights here, basically around how you define those windows it looks at. So there's a window start, a window end, and then there's a required group by criteria, which indicates what are you looking at to determine what defines that window in the first place here too. With the calculated insights, you can trigger the data actions. And so data actions tend to be not like full marketing or commerce cloud activations, but just sort of simple notifications or actions. So things like Slack notifications, chatter posts, emails that go out, those are valid data actions that can be triggered based off of certain conditions, or you can send them to Salesforce platform events. So if you want to send that over to that as a data action target, then of course you can receive that and take whatever sort of other automation action you want to do within there. And so this was an example where if you look at what we defined and what we're doing here is, we've looked at where there's a unified individual that is essentially has entered a geofence based on data that we brought in from the web app, and then based on that, we can then essentially send some sort of notification or offer to them because we know that they have entered our store. The other calculated insight, I kind of breezed over this a little bit, was the spend by customer. I'm going to use that as the basis for one of the segments we can define here, which is in this case dormant shopper with high loyalty balance. So as you go in to define a segment, it's going to show the attributes which are associated with those corresponding DMOs, and then allow you to build segments out of those. In this case, it's pretty straightforward that if we have a loyalty member currency where, according to the buckets that we've defined, where they're considered extreme, they're very high loyalty customer here, but they haven't actually made any purchases in the last 3 months, we can define a segment out of that and go take some action here. And based on that, then we can use an activation for that, where we can basically send that off to, in this case, conceptually, it would be like a marketing cloud or commerce cloud to take some action on that. And I like this one particularly because it's a good example of sort of the holistic approach of, what are we doing with Data Cloud here? So you think about what are we looking at in this segment here? Well, we had data from a loyalty system. We had data from a transactional system. We ingested both of those into the platform. We looked at the identifiers that were associated with, essentially the customers in those various segments there. We unified that to identify that, okay, we believe this loyalty program member is the same as this transactional member from over here. And then based on that, we can generate insights. we looked at data which corresponds to the loyalty system and the sales order in a single segment, and then we're able to use that to send that out. And to me, that's Data Cloud in a nutshell. So, so with that said, there's a couple things that I just want to jump back to. I'm going to jump back to my presentation here for a moment, and cover a couple other questions which may come up. So give me a moment here. Okay, so I'll revisit the diagram here just to kind of sum up what's everything that we've looked at and talked about here. So we've talked about data ingest, the avenues that are available for that. How does Data Cloud bring those in? How does it work on standardizing those for certain types of fields? How does it map it to the common data model to allow those apples for apples comparisons here? Then based on that, we're in position to apply some rules around how we've determined that we believe that these are the same consumer, and then use that to take action for insights about that collected data, and to be able to take action on that. So all that said, sorry, let me advance my slides here. Common question, well, how much does this cost? And the short answer is it's variable, like many things in the Salesforce world. It depends. It's based on what they call credits. Credits are consumed by most things that you do within the platform. How often are you ingesting data? How much data are you storing? How often are you running these sort of identity resolutions, insights, segmentation, activation usage? And honestly, this makes sense because, as we said, Data Cloud is backed on Amazon Web Services. And that's how things are priced on AWS, is how much compute time did you use? How much storage are you using here? And so, of course, there's a Salesforce markup associated with that, but it's designed around really how much are you doing here. If you saw the Dreamforce keynote this a couple months ago, you saw Mark Benioff talking about how we're going to make this available for all orgs. And if you're at enterprise level or higher, that is true. You do have access to a Data Cloud org. We'll talk about how to get into that here in a moment. That said, it is a little bit limited. The number of credits that you're provided is as you might expect, significantly less than you would get through the Data Cloud Starter bundle here. And you are limited on what you can do with that down the road. There's no segmentations or activations available in that that starter org. You really could think of it more as maybe a sort of try before you buy type thing to see about how you could ingest data, how you could unify identities based off of that, and then maybe use that as the basis for jumping into a real full implementation where you're then taking advantage of that for engagement of your constituents. So if you're interested in how do I get started with Data Cloud here, as I mentioned, so if you're on Enterprise Edition or higher, it is free to enable in your org. It's not an installed package. This is not an extension that you go to App Exchange for. Where you go is to the Your Account tab, go to your products list, look for one called Data Cloud Provisioning. And it's $0. But if you want further information on how you actually do that, go to the Salesforce help is really the best source for that. I would look for Data Cloud Access and Provisioning. You'll find all the information there. Of course, it'll loop in your AE, and I'm sure you'll get many questions about that. Hey, so you're looking at Data Cloud here, but it is really truly available for a $0 cost. If you're really just trying to learn about Data Cloud, as a partner or a practitioner. If you're a partner, I would highly advise go to Partner Learning Camp. You do have access to the 90-day trial org and some great exercises associated with that for working through it. If you're not a partner, the same content to a great extent is available on Trailhead. There's a Trail Mix, prepare for your Salesforce Data Cloud Consultant credential. Basically all the same content that's available at the partner side. Just you won't have the trial org available there. Presumably, you may be administrator for an org where you can go and get it installed yourself there as well. So with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. Normally, I would jump into a questions phase, but obviously this is not interactive here. So thank you very much for the time, and good luck with your efforts here. Thank you.